Thank you, Kirby. I appreciate the introduction. It's always nice to get back to the West Slope, even if it is for far too short a time. And it sounds like another speaker this morning had the same issue I do. I have a son who's going to be pitching Go Ponderosa at 5 o'clock, and so I'm going to end up bolting out of here. But if you have questions beyond what I answer during the Q&A, feel free to get in touch. Folks here, Matt, Kathleen, will be glad to tell you how to get in touch with me. This has been a remarkable 5 years that I've been in this position. And I think one of the things that I want to start with before I talk about the task force process itself is to provide a little bit more broad context. We tend to get locked in our world and we look at where we are in Colorado. We know the issues that we're facing and the contentious debates that are occurring, but we sometimes forget, and we need to be pulled out of our close-knit environment and see how we're looked at across the rest of the country. I had the privilege of going to Harvard about a month ago to participate in a symposium, the best and brightest minds in the environmental community, the oil and gas, and the academic world, and it truly is astounding, and you forget where we are in Colorado. We are held up as a model for how to navigate through these difficult issues of oil and gas development, particularly in new areas where this hasn't historically occurred. Now, there are parts of Colorado, we're in one of them right now, of course, that has a long history in oil and gas development. But what is creating the contentious debate today is this activity is going into parts of the state that historically have not wrestled with the inherent conflict between development of our natural resources and protection of our quality of life. But I also want to remind you that we not only are a model within this country as how to do what we've done in Colorado and avoid the kind of draconian outcome that we've seen in states like New York. We, within the Department of Natural Resources and Matt Schaap at OGCC, within the last 5 years, we have been taken individually to China, Chile, Estonia, the Ukraine, Latvia, Brazil, Indonesia, and Botswana. The U.S. Department of Energy gets experts from Colorado, from our shop and Matt's shop, and takes us around the world to talk to these developing countries about how to develop oil and gas regulations. We are truly not only a national model, but an international model. Part of that comes from just having to deal with the tough issues that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. If you'll remember back to 2006, when Governor Ritter was reelected and the focus was on what are we going to do to protect our mule deer herds and our sage grouse, this was a hotbed of activity, and having participated in those discussions and rulemaking, the word Niobrara was never even really mentioned during that time. We find ourselves now where the conflict is not primarily focused, although greater sage grouse is clearly a focus today and will be through September, but the conflict that's arising is along the Front Range in these communities that I alluded to earlier, who historically haven't dealt with this type of activity. And so where we found ourselves in the spring of 2014 was locked in a debate about how to avoid a ballot initiative that would have basically resulted in an epic battle between anti-oil and gas and industry in Colorado. We would effectively have been playing Russian roulette with our economy in the state. The governor, we worked through the legislative session trying to come up with a bill that we would get the General Assembly to wrestle with and back away from this cliff that we were headed to. Strangely enough, we couldn't get traction. We couldn't get people focused on the potential risk that this ballot initiative would create. I think what happened is we saw that the fractivists, the anti-oil and gas contingency, moved forward with their process and actually got 18 different ballot initiatives title approved and headed towards signatures. That resulted in some pro-industry groups getting a couple ballot initiatives of their own on at least through the title setting process. But we were looking at 9 setback initiatives and 9 local control. And for those of you who don't have a little bit of the background, we are in Colorado, with maybe the exception of Oregon, the easiest state to get a citizen initiative on to amend our state constitution in the country. It is a much bigger issue, and clearly we saw the potential impact on oil and gas, but we wrestle with this citizen initiative process I like to tell people citizen initiatives are inherently blunt instruments. They're simple solutions to what are inherently very complicated problems. I think it is a real difficult integration with representative democracy, and we saw where that was headed in early 2014. During the summer, we talked about a special session. We continued to try and build towards a legislative solution. We couldn't get there. It was one of these instances where everybody surrounding Governor Hickenlooper were saying, we tried, we couldn't get this done. And the governor simply wouldn't back off. He just continued to work and work, and I think we got a call on a Sunday afternoon, and he said, I think I may have a deal. And so with that, we began to put some framework around what the construct of this deal would be. And it was the creation of this task force that met for seven or eight times over the course of 5 or 6 months across Colorado to listen to concerns from these communities and to begin to try and forge some solutions that would, in addition to avoiding a ballot initiative, would also provide us some tools to wrestle with the conflict that we have seen arising in these areas, especially along the Front Range. I think what we've proven over and over in Colorado through the OGCC, through the local government designee, through local elected officials and their representatives, that when we engage in a constructive discussion, we can resolve the issues. We have 15 MOUs across this state, each dealing with the unique concerns of their community. Whether it's Brighton and they're concerned with their shallow groundwater aquifers, we worked with industry, got an MOU with Brighton, so we're going to belt and suspender through those aquifers. That community is now willing to move forward and allow oil and gas development. We have, at the other end of the spectrum, Gunnison County. When you think about Gunnison and you understand the values of that community, they were concerned about riparian setbacks. So industry, the operators in Gunnison County, sat down with the county. We worked with them at OGCC and developed an MOU that would have setbacks beyond the state standard. But the reoccurring theme is that when industry is given the opportunity to look at their ownership patterns, to look at the topography, to look at the split estate issues, to the geology, the recoverability of the resource, and the drilling windows, industry is willing to go above and beyond what the regulations require, but it needs to be on a site-specific basis so they can make sure that they're not backing themselves into a corner and leaving resources in the ground. So what the task force came up with at the end of the day was effectively institutionalizing some of the things that we've used effectively through the MOU process. We have created a process by which industry will come forward, and we're going to begin promulgation of these regulations shortly after the General Assembly concludes. As a little bit of an aside, we were very pleased that the General Assembly left the recommendations alone, not only didn't alter them, but didn't come up and present any ideas that weren't accepted by the task force. We think that's constructive. We think we have a significant task ahead of us, but the tools to begin to alleviate some of these most contentious issues. The first is that industry agreed unanimously. There were 9 recommendations by the task force. 7 of them were unanimous. And when you look at the makeup of that commission, that task force, you realize how amazing it is that you could get 21 people with those perspectives to agree on 7 of the 9 recommendations. And the other 2 recommendations were I think, within 2 or 3 votes of being unanimous. So it was one of the most difficult discussions I think I've ever participated. Those of you who came and watched and maybe participated in the public comment know what I'm talking about. But at the end of the day, we got some additional tools. So the first is that industry agreed, where local governments have a comprehensive land planning process, that industry will come in and give a 5-year view from their perspective and say, this is what 5 years of development looks like for XYG company. Again, those of you in industry know that 1 year you can probably make some reasonable projections. 2 years it gets a little more sketchy, and then things get really ambiguous as you start looking out 5. But I think industry and local governments understand that, and as those plans change, you'll modify them. So that's the first step, is industry will engage about what their drilling plans are for those communities up to 5 years out. Any community, the second recommendation is any community that requests the opportunity to sit down and discuss their specific concerns, industry will be required in these areas of high mitigation, high impact, to sit down with the local elected officials and work through the concerns. In the event that the local government and the industry can't agree with the proposed development, they will then submit to mandatory mediation. It won't be binding arbitration, but it will be mediation. So a third party will help try and navigate them through these issues. Then and only then, if they can't reach an agreement, would they be able to come to the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. So again, I think what we've done is we've structured a process by which these MOUs can be developed in a more formulaic manner and hopefully facilitate those discussions. I think that's an incredibly important deal, and I think it's something that we're probably not seeing anywhere else around the country. So the rulemaking that will begin in shortly after this session ends, probably do some outreach, some stakeholder work, and then towards a final adoption next spring. The rulemaking will entail a couple things. First is we need to define those high intensity areas. The recommendation said where you have high intensity oil and gas development as well as some threshold level of residential people existence, you will trigger this process that I just referred to where you consult with the local government and try and work through the issues. So we need to determine what's the level of housing density, what's the level of oil and gas activity that would kick you into that area. In addition to the process that will be laid out for those discussions, we'll probably have a discussion about whether, if you find yourself in those most contentious areas, will there be heightened BMPs? Will you be, under what circumstances would you be required to use electric drilling? Is that available in that area? What other types of noise mitigation, traffic mitigation can you put collection facilities further away from the drill site, use some piping to mitigate some of the impacts? So will there be substantive mitigations that go along with those recommendations and with the process that will be developed as well? The third recommendation from the task force was an enhanced local government liaison process with OGCC. I think folks here in Garfield understand how productive that can be if you got a guy like Kirby who sleeps with his cell phone next to his bed and answers those calls at any time at day or night. You can alleviate a lot of the concerns. It's labor intensive, but at the end of the day, I think it is an example of things that we can do to mitigate the impacts in communities where oil and gas development is occurring. We've also, the recommendation number 4 was to implement a compliance assistance program. We understand that every regulation we pass comes with a cost to industry. We do it because we believe that it is fundamental to maintaining the social license for oil and gas to operate in this state. We are a different state. We're not Oklahoma and Texas. We have areas that have not historically had this, and there is an understandable concern when an industrial activity comes into your community. So we will have the regulations. We will continue to build upon the best, most robust regulations in the country through this process, but we will also be very cognizant of working with industry through a compliance assistance program and making sure that we are not being haphazard in our enforcement or unfair, that we're really keeping our eye on the ball and working with industry to make sure that they understand the regulations and working with them through the compliance assistance. Inevitably, some cases will be where we just simply have to bring an enforcement action. That's what we do. We're regulators. But we always look for the opportunity to work with industry to comply rather than going straight to enforcement issues, especially on smaller violations. The 5th recommendation was to approve the rule review bill, which was the first in the nation methane rules that CDPHE passed. The air quality rules that we have in Colorado, again, are second to none in the country. We're the only state that has a methane emission rule, and we think that's critical. The legislature has adopted that recommendation. That rule review bill has passed, and we will be able to go forward without having a lapse in that rule. We also created a oil and gas, natural gas clearinghouse. We're going to house that at CDPHE, so people have the best information available about oil and gas activity. Again, trying to get fair information, accurate information. We live in an era of the internet where if you want information, you can find it, but finding good information is much more difficult. So we are going to make sure that we have that available through CDPHE. We're also in the process of creating a process by which CDPHE will house complaints. So we will have much more systematic recording of complaints as they come in and document whether we're having more in a certain community, more with certain operators. We'll have better data than rather than just what we have now, which is kind of a rough justice feel about what's going on and what's coming into us. We think that will help us focus on areas where there are problems, as well as rebut some of these allegations about wholesale problems where we don't believe they exist. Recommendation number 7 is the creation of a group of folks through CDOT and local communities that will work on traffic issues. We always think in big issues about carbon. We saw a huge amount of the information about where we're going there. In local communities, it's about noise and traffic and some of the more nuisance issues rather than what we think of as traditionally environmental issues. So traffic will be something that we will get on right away, and it won't require rule change, but we will explore with CDOT opportunities to minimize traffic. And we'll probably also engage with operators about the opportunity to use piping to minimize truck traffic. Again, the big operators, some of the bigger operators are capable of doing and are doing that right now because it makes better neighbors. We requested 12 FTE for OGCC. I always like to provide some context. In 2004, we had 35 employees at the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. When we hire these, it will be 112. That's, in 11 years, we have ramped up that much. So in addition to having the most robust regulations, we have the staff that is capable of providing the inspections and enforcement and building public support for the regulatory system here in Colorado. I talked a little bit, CDPHE got their complaint line. They also got staffing to do mobile air quality monitoring. This is going to continue to be a major issue. We have areas of inversion and EPA air compliance, so that will help us with leak detection and some of the other risk assessments that will, again, be based on sound science through CDPHE rather than some of the unsubstantiated allegations that we continue to hear coming forward. This set of recommendations will, it'll be an interesting rulemaking. They're all interesting in some respects, I guess, but I think that there was broad acceptance of what the task force did. There was some concern and some chirping from the local elected officials in certain parts of the state that we did not delegate local control. We did not give authority of oil and gas regulations to the local government. We are confident in our interpretation of state law that primacy of regulation belongs with the OGCC, and we think that having a robust regulation system, but having one rather than 200 is critical. We think that industry has stepped up time and time again to do the right thing, and if we have a single set of robust regulations and the staff to enforce, we think that's best for business, we think that's best for the environment, and best ultimately for Colorado. So those are, in a nutshell, where we came from and where we're headed. I will probably go ahead and answer the first question that I would guess would be asked, and it's the political question about what's likely to happen in 2016. As a political prognosticator, I have no record, and I hope none of you remember this in the event that I'm wrong. But I do think 2016 presents a very different political year. Because it only takes 86,000 signatures to get on the ballot, my guess is that we will have something on the ballot. Based on the polling that I saw last time, we were privileged to see polling from industry as well as polling from the environmental community. Both sides' polling showed that they were going to prevail. Someone was clearly wrong. But I think that the most likely ballot would be a straight number setback, which again is an incredibly blunt instrument that fails to take into consideration the enhanced mitigation that we put into the last setback rulemaking. I think there are a lot of things that industry can do when they need to be closer than 2,000, 1,500, or even 1,000 feet to mitigate those impacts. And I think a bright line that doesn't take into effect the other mitigation is probably not good for where we need to be, and I think it would cause a tremendous amount of heartburn if we had a bright line and no process for variance based on heightened mitigation. So the short answer is I expect to see something on the ballot. I expect it to be a straight number relative to a setback, and I don't expect it to have the same financial support from within Colorado that maybe we would have seen last time. I think the dynamics of a presidential election and a United States Senate election coming up, I think, raises the stakes and probably shifts some of those political dynamics as to who might support these ballot initiatives from the environmental side. So I think something will be on. I think it will not be well funded and have a very, very difficult time passing. I think even more so if we get a good set of regs coming out of this process next spring, and ask the public to give these rules an opportunity to succeed before we even contemplate going down the road of a ballot initiative. So Kirby, that's the extent of my comments. I'd love to take questions.